And now for a different kind of survivalism, the end of a nation and the end of an identity. Imagine if you were stranded on a deserted island and over many years until you were finally found. It has been 40 years since you have seen home. How would you spend your first day back? Well, now think about this scenario. What if you awaken one morning to find that your country is no longer your country, but it has been annexed by a neighboring country? What would you do? What if you had a government job? How would you make a living after that? Well, the fall of East Berlin and East Germany came very suddenly, although there were signs that change was on the horizon. Primarily, Mikhail Gorbachev was distancing Russia from supporting other Eastern Bloc nations, actually dissolving it. And he was allowing for open borders and more self-rule in those nations, which led to many East Germans migrating to Hungary and Czechoslovakia to emigrate into West Germany. This led to an effective ban on all travel outside of East Germany for East Germans, and this loss of freedom to travel and the wish to democratically elect their leaders, they were central to the protests that began in Leipzig soon thereafter. The Monday demos, as they became to be known as, began in early September in 1989 at the St. Nicholas Church in Leipzig, and they were peaceful candlelit protests. But soon after the first demo, state security forces barricaded the streets around the meeting point, and they started to attack some of the protesters. As news of this spread in West German media, it also informed many East Germans from other cities who then joined in the protests. In October, the demonstrations had grown considerably, and the state police cracked down on these with an estimated 3,500 arrests. The following week, security forces had increased their number to include 8,000 police that met with a demonstration of over 70,000 protesters. The week after, there were 120,000 demonstrators. And the week after that, there were 320,000 protesters. Demonstrators met a heavy militia presence and were on standby, but it did not turn into a massacre as it had in Hungary in 1956. This pressure eventually led to a shift in political leadership and a promise to travel freely, but the corrupt and oppressive system would still remain. With the new leadership, there were many fresh faces occupying new roles in this new government. So on November 9th, the new foreign press secretary, Gunter Schabowski, intended to end his report with the acknowledgement that the freedom to travel would be granted without really knowing any of the details at the time. So a reporter from Italy asked him when that would begin. And without really knowing or being able to ask or call, he said simply, immediately. So this news got picked up by the West, and they soon started to blast it over their airwaves. And soon a throng of people came to the border crossings, especially in Berlin, to see if this were true. And they tested it out. So as pressure mounted, the guards at the border were instructed to let people out, but to stamp their passports as revoked to prevent their re-entry. Soon, they were overwhelmed by the number and the outrage and let everyone cross unmitigated. A crossing that had previously cost the lives of hundreds of East Germans who were attempting to escape. The removal of the wall in Berlin began on the very same night by anonymous parties as the border wall was flooded and continued for the following weeks until bulldozers arrived and were officially torn down. The wall was officially torn down to create a really new border crossings so that the traffic was funneled and they could collect taxes, an exchange tax. The 4+2 treaty that met in 1990, and it was a meeting of the Allies and then the two Germanys, with West Germany left to decide most all of the political and economic details because it was their economic power and relationship that had really created this opportunity between the United States and Russia, who had received several billion marks in aid from West Germany over the past several years. East German plans were never really even allowed to come to the table. So in effect, West Germany annexed the East, replacing its currency in July of 1990, and soon thereafter holding new elections. By January 15th, 1990, East Germany was over, and the public stormed the Stasi office to keep the officials there from destroying the evidence of the regime's criminality. In Dresden, some of the crowd went over to break into the KGB offices and were met at the gate by Vladimir Putin, who warned them not to enter the building. And while files were already being destroyed, many of them were recovered, and the information in them not only held key intelligence on who had been spying on you, but also the histories of those who had worked for the Nazis during the war. As this new freedom was celebrated and the right to free elections and travel was gained, there were some new forms of security that were lost. The guarantee of job, housing, education, daycare, and other socialized programs were now privatized or eliminated or set into new forms. The estimated 8,000 state-owned factories and businesses were given to the Treuhandgesellschaft to auction off to willing investors. Many of these were bought up by Western competitors who, after purchasing the factory, closed it to eliminate that competition. Other investors who wanted to establish themselves in the East found the machinery outdated and in disrepair and could often not afford to keep it open. Suddenly, bills appeared from electricity, water, heat, and some people even had to pay rent, something that was entirely new for East Germans. In the initial decade following the end of East Germany, the region was riddled with massive unemployment, which sent the talented young people to the West or abroad, and many who left behind felt like second-class citizens. For women, unemployment went from near 0 to 21%, and from 0 to 11% for men. The brands that East Germans trusted and loved were gone from the shelves, replaced by Western imposters, so that towards the middle of this decade, there arose a longing for some of the older brands. So it became a consumerist sort of nostalgia, which reappeared in some new forms. This longing for the nation that no longer existed was termed Ostalgie, a nostalgia for Ostdeutschland, or East Germany. It is a different form of apocalyptic vision that we have here, where for many it was a liberating moment, but for many others it was a painful rupture in their lives. That perhaps it was being romanticized, this past was romanticized, the further that they were removed from it. So during the 1980s, there was a popular rise in the anti-hero, from the slasher films, boogeymen turned heroes, to the bloodthirsty capitalist Patrick Bateman of American Psycho, who become protagonists. And the end of the Cold War was seen by many as a shift towards late-stage capitalism and its cutthroat politics. Over the airwaves in Germany blasted "Here Comes Alex," referring to the protagonist of A Clockwork Orange, sung by Die Toten Hosen or the Dead Pants, a punk rock band. And in this story, though, with Alex, his brutality creates a spectacle for the audience as the question of freedom and free thought becomes complicated by those whose inclinations are for sadism. In The Age of Burning Mountains by Horst Buchalkius, we see the demise of the civilization. Its apocalyptic end has come from the end of technology as a cosmic cloud has disrupted all electromagnetic waves. The protagonist, Martin Tilbert, has an optimism about the new opportunities that the current situation has brought, but it's not shared by his partner Wenke, whose life has been derailed by the sudden shift, and she deludes herself with alcohol every day. Buchalkius predicts the future of the East accurately, as many of the new citizens had trouble coping, and an already problematic consumption of alcohol was made even worse, as many post-war studies have shown. Buchalkius also predicts the collapse of the monetary system, made famously humorous in films like Goodbye Lenin, where a doting son attempts to hide the fact that there's no longer in East Germany for his mother, who awakens from a coma after everything has changed. He misses the last exchange date for her money that she had been keeping safe underneath her mattress, rather than in a bank. The most telling prediction is the elimination of effective communication. Remember, this is 4 years before hypertext would revolutionize the way we communicate online. So the stagnation threatens to linger for as far as they can tell. This inability to communicate and organize on a national level leads to regional chieftains who vie for control of areas. While there was little violent gang activity in the former GDR, after it was annexed, there was an unexpected surge in neo-Nazi and skinhead activity in the East, where xenophobia and far-right parties remain popular still today. They're marginal, but they're still larger than in other states, even more so than in the rest of Europe. Buchalkius writes specifically about those things that were considered taboo in the East. Since it had one of the highest suicide rates among young males, it stopped publishing statistics on suicide there in the 1960s. From the research that is available, it appears that these high numbers have increased since the fall of the wall. In the final chapter, we see how this new environment moves Martin to adopt a cutthroat philosophy with his new scheme to adopt ostrich couriers who can easily traverse the rubble to reestablish lines of communication and then extract the fees of a postal service would. Establishing such a service to gain influence is not without precedent. Only You only have to really think about the ways in which Amazon has slowly established itself as an essential worldwide courier for services and products, including data. But Martin considers him a man of this new age. And it's really, at first, he is this complacent person with an optimistic view of what the world could hold for him. But after being rejected by his partner, who seeks this sort of sordid affair with someone else of a higher status, he changes his worldview into that of a cutthroat opportunist. Is this story a warning of what will come, or a prediction of the inevitable, of what will happen in the East? Well, whichever is the case, Pukolis emphasizes how the catastrophic environment the East faces will dissolve its communal bonds and reward the self-serving, interested individuals.